The morning sun blazed down on the USS Theodore Roosevelt's flight deck like a furnace, turning the steel into waves of shimmering heat. FA-18 Super Hornets sat in perfect formation, their sleek frames gleaming with jet fuel residue and the promise of flight. Deck crews moved with practiced precision, their movements choreographed by years of training and the unforgiving demands of carrier operations. Lieutenant Rebecca Glint Morrison adjusted her helmet bag strap and walked toward the mission briefing area, her boots finding the familiar rhythm between deck plates. She'd been assigned to the Roosevelt for 18 months now, and every morning brought the same ritual: check the assignment board, review the flight schedule, and prepare for whatever the day might bring. But today felt different. Today marked the beginning of the joint training exercise with the French Naval Aviation Team, and every pilot on the ship knew that meant one thing: only the best would be selected for the international intercept missions. Rebecca had logged more flight hours than most pilots in her squadron. She'd graduated third in her class from Pensacola, earned her carrier qualification on the first attempt, and maintained a perfect safety record throughout her deployment. Her radar tracking skills were legendary among the tech crews, and her ability to read enemy movement patterns had saved more than one training exercise from embarrassing failures. None of that seemed to matter when she reached the assignment board. A crowd of pilots had gathered around the digital display, their flight suits crisp with morning starch, and their attitudes bright with anticipation. Rebecca recognized most of them. Lieutenant Commander Jake "Stitch" Harrison, the squadron's golden boy who never missed an opportunity to remind everyone about his family's military legacy. Lieutenant Marcus "Viper" Thompson, whose aggressive flying style had earned him both commendations and reprimands. And Captain David "Razor" Williams, the squadron leader who treated every mission briefing like a Hollywood movie audition. "Looks like we've got ourselves a real show this week," Stitch announced, his voice carrying that familiar tone of casual arrogance that made Rebecca's jaw tighten. "French Rafales, live intercept scenarios, and full media coverage. This is what we've been training for, people." The assignment list glowed on the screen, each pilot's name matched with their call sign and mission designation. Rebecca scanned the list once, then twice, then a third time with growing disbelief. Her name wasn't there. Not in the primary intercept squadron, not in the backup rotation, not even in the support roles that typically went to junior officers. Still learning the ropes. "Hey, Glint!" called out Lieutenant Tony "Hawk" Rodriguez, one of the few pilots who'd always treated her with genuine respect. "You see your assignment yet?" Rebecca shook her head, still staring at the screen. "Must be on the secondary board," she said, though she could already feel the familiar weight of disappointment settling in her chest. Stitch glanced over, his expression shifting to something that might have been sympathy if it weren't so obviously rehearsed. "Actually, Morrison, you're being reassigned to simulation support. Command thinks your radar analysis skills would be better utilized in the control room." The words hit her like a physical blow. Simulation support. The assignment given to pilots who weren't trusted with real aircraft, who weren't considered ready for the pressure of actual combat scenarios. It was the kind of role that kept you grounded while everyone else soared. "Sir, I believe there's been a mistake," Rebecca said, her voice steady despite the storm building inside her chest. "My flight evaluations are current. My readiness scores are above squadron average, and I've successfully completed every training requirement for international exercises." Stitch's smile didn't waver, but something cold flickered behind his eyes. "Orders come from the top, Morrison. You know how it works." "But I don't understand why." "The decision's been made." Captain Williams stepped forward, his voice carrying the finality of command authority. "You'll report to the simulation bay at 0800. Lieutenant Rodriguez will brief you on your duties." Rebecca felt the eyes of every pilot in the group on her. Some looked away in embarrassment. Others watched with barely concealed curiosity. A few seemed to be fighting back smiles as if witnessing someone else's demotion was the best entertainment they'd had all week. "Understood, sir," she said, though nothing about the situation made sense. As the crowd dispersed, Rebecca caught sight of Hawk approaching. He glanced around to make sure they weren't being overheard, then leaned closer. "This isn't right," he said quietly. "Everyone knows you're one of the best radar operators we have. Hell, you've caught intercept patterns that our automated systems missed completely." "Apparently that's not enough," Rebecca replied, adjusting her helmet bag strap with more force than necessary. "There's something else going on here," Hawk continued. "I heard Stitch and Williams talking yesterday after the briefing, something about maintaining unit cohesion and avoiding unnecessary complications, whatever that means." Rebecca felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ocean breeze. "What kind of complications?" "I don't know, but I think you should document everything. Keep records of your performance evaluations, training completions, everything. If this is what I think it is." He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. Rebecca had been in the Navy long enough to recognize the signs of discrimination when she saw them. The question was whether she had the courage to fight back against a system that seemed determined to keep her grounded. As she walked away from the assignment board, Rebecca made a decision that would change everything. She wouldn't just accept this quietly. She would prove that she belonged in the cockpit of an FA-18, even if it meant taking on the entire command structure to do it. The simulation bay was about to become her laboratory, and she was going to conduct an experiment that would shake the foundations of everything they thought they knew about her capabilities. The simulation bay felt like a tomb compared to the vibrant energy of the flight deck. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a sterile white glow that made Rebecca's skin look pale and washed out. Banks of computers lined the walls, their screens flickering with diagnostic data and training scenarios that would never see the light of day. Rebecca sat at her assigned workstation, a cramped desk tucked into the corner where she could monitor radar feeds from the live exercises without being in anyone's way. Her job was simple: track incoming aircraft, verify their positions against the training parameters, and report any anomalies to the flight control team. It was work that could have been done by a computer program, and everyone knew it. "Morning, Glint," Tony Rodriguez said as he entered the bay, carrying a steaming cup of coffee and a folder thick with training documents. "Ready for another exciting day of watching other people fly?" Rebecca managed a weak smile. "Living the dream, Hawk." Tony's expression grew serious as he approached her workstation. "Listen, I've been asking around about your reassignment. Quietly, you understand. What I'm hearing isn't good." "What do you mean?" "Word is that some of the senior officers think you're, how did they put it, too focused on technical details and not enough on team integration." Tony's voice carried the sarcasm of someone quoting something he found ridiculous. "Apparently, your habit of catching mistakes in their flight plans is seen as disruptive to unit morale." Rebecca felt her hands clench into fists. "So they're punishing me for being good at my job." "It gets worse. I heard Stitch telling some of the other pilots that you're only qualified for simulation work, said you've never actually proven yourself in a real combat scenario." The unfairness of it hit Rebecca like a physical blow. She'd been assigned to simulation support precisely because she wasn't allowed to participate in real combat scenarios. It was a circular logic that would have been funny if it weren't destroying her career. "He's creating a paper trail," Rebecca said, understanding dawning, "making it look like I'm not capable of real flight operations." "That's what I'm thinking, and there's something else." Tony glanced around to make sure they weren't being overheard. "I was in the ready room yesterday when they were planning today's exercise. Williams mentioned that they're going to be running some advanced intercept scenarios that aren't in the official training manual." "What kind of scenarios?" "The kind that push the boundaries of what's supposed to be possible. Low-altitude radar tracking, signal interference patterns, things that require the kind of technical expertise that—" Tony paused meaningfully. "Well, that you specialize in." Rebecca stared at the radar screen in front of her, watching the training aircraft move through their predictable patterns. An idea began to form in her mind, dangerous and potentially career-ending, but also potentially brilliant. "Hawk," she said slowly, "what if I could prove that I'm not just capable of flying these missions, but that I'm better at them than anyone else in the squadron?" "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that they've made one crucial mistake. They've put me in charge of monitoring the radar systems during the most challenging training exercises of the year. They think they're keeping me away from the action, but they've actually given me a front-row seat to everything they're doing wrong." Tony's eyes widened as he understood her implication. "You're going to analyze their performance. I'm going to do more than that. I'm going to document every mistake, every missed opportunity, every failure of their superior tactical planning. And then I'm going to show them how it should have been done. That's risky, Glint. If they catch you undermining their authority—" "They're already undermining my career. What's the worst they can do, ground me?" Rebecca's voice carried a bitter edge. "I'm already grounded." As if summoned by their conversation, Lieutenant Commander Harrison appeared in the doorway of the simulation bay. His flight suit was perfectly pressed, his blonde hair immaculately styled, and his expression carried the kind of casual superiority that Rebecca had come to despise. "Morrison," he said, not bothering with pleasantries, "I need you to run a diagnostic on the radar calibration systems. We're seeing some interference patterns that don't match our simulations." Rebecca looked up from her workstation. "What kind of interference?" "Nothing you need to worry about. Just run the diagnostic and report back if you find any technical glitches." "Sir, if you could give me more details about the specific patterns you're seeing, I might be able to—" "I said run the diagnostic, Morrison. Leave the tactical analysis to the people who actually fly the missions." The dismissal was so casual, so completely devoid of respect, that Rebecca felt something snap inside her chest. But instead of lashing out, she simply nodded and turned back to her computer. "Yes, sir." As Stitch left the bay, Tony moved closer to Rebecca's workstation. "You okay?" "I'm better than okay," Rebecca said, her fingers already flying across the keyboard. "I'm motivated." The diagnostic Stitch had requested was simple enough, but Rebecca decided to go deeper. She pulled up the radar logs from the previous day's exercises, cross-referencing them with the flight plans and weather data. What she found made her blood run cold. The squadron had missed 3 separate intercept opportunities due to faulty radar interpretation. Their tactical planning had been based on outdated atmospheric models that didn't account for the unique conditions around the carrier, and most damning of all, their confidence in their own abilities had blinded them to clear signs of system failures that any competent radar operator should have caught. Rebecca saved her analysis to a secure folder and began planning her next move. She would need more data, more evidence, and most importantly, more time to prepare for what she was beginning to realize would be the fight of her life. But as she watched the training aircraft circle overhead through the small porthole in the simulation bay, Rebecca felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope. They had made a mistake putting her in this position. They thought they were burying her, but they had actually given her the tools she needed to prove that she was better than all of them combined. The question was whether she would have the courage to use those tools when the time came. 3 weeks into the joint training exercise, Rebecca had gathered enough evidence to fill a small library. Her secure folder contained detailed analyses of every failed intercept, every missed radar signature, and every tactical error that the squadron's leadership had made. She had documentation of their reluctance to admit mistakes, their tendency to blame equipment failures for their own shortcomings, and their consistent pattern of dismissing her technical expertise. But documentation wasn't enough. She needed something bigger, something that would force them to confront the reality of their own incompetence. That opportunity came on a Tuesday morning when the weather turned against them. Rebecca was monitoring the radar feeds when she noticed the atmospheric disturbance building to the southwest. The system was subtle at first, just a slight shift in the electromagnetic signature that would be invisible to standard detection equipment. But her modified analysis protocols caught it immediately. The disturbance would create a radar shadow, a blind spot in their detection grid that could hide incoming aircraft from their sensors. It was exactly the kind of technical challenge that required the expertise they insisted she didn't possess. She immediately reached for her communication headset to alert the flight control team. "Control, this is Morrison in simulation support. I'm seeing atmospheric interference patterns that will affect radar coverage in Sector 7. Recommend adjusting flight paths to compensate." The response came back from Lieutenant Commander Harrison's voice, clipped and dismissive. "Morrison, we're not seeing anything on our instruments. Focus on your assigned duties." Sir, I'm looking at the electromagnetic analysis. The interference is building and will peak in approximately 30 minutes. If we don't adjust our intercept patterns... Morrison? The edge in Stitch's voice was sharp enough to cut. You're monitoring simulation feeds, not actual tactical operations. Leave the real flying to the real pilots. Rebecca felt her face flush with anger, but she kept her voice steady. Sir, I'm looking at the live radar feeds. The interference is real, and it's going to create a significant blind spot in our coverage. Enough! Return to your assigned duties immediately. The communication channel went dead, leaving Rebecca staring at her screens in frustration. She could see the building interference pattern as clearly as if it were painted on the sky, but no one would listen to her warnings. 30 minutes later, the French Rafales launched their surprise attack. They came in low and fast, using the exact radar shadow that Rebecca had tried to warn them about. The squadron's intercept aircraft were positioned perfectly to miss them, their pilots flying blind through the electromagnetic dead zone, while the French fighters slipped past their defenses like ghosts. Rebecca watched it all happen from her workstation, her heart pounding as she realized she was witnessing a complete tactical failure. The squadron's pride was about to be shattered, and she was the only person who could have prevented it. But there was something else, something that made her pulse quicken with a different kind of excitement. She had a solution. While the squadron's pilots struggled with their compromised radar systems, Rebecca had been working on something they didn't know existed, a manual tracking protocol that could cut through electromagnetic interference using signal analysis techniques that most pilots had never even heard of. She had developed it during her off-duty hours using her own theoretical research and some of the advanced signal processing methods she'd learned in graduate school. It was unconventional, untested in live combat scenarios, and completely outside the bounds of standard Navy procedures. It was also the only thing that could save them. Rebecca's fingers flew across her keyboard as she activated her custom tracking protocol. The radar screen flickered, then stabilized into a clear image that cut through the interference like a knife through fog. The French Rafales appeared on her display, their positions marked with crystal clarity. She had them. But as she reached for her communication headset to relay the intercept coordinates, she hesitated. The squadron leadership had made it clear that they didn't want her input. They had dismissed her warnings, questioned her expertise, and relegated her to a support role that kept her away from real operations. Why should she save them from their own arrogance? The answer came to her as she watched the squadron's aircraft circle uselessly through the radar shadow, their pilots frustrated and blind while the French fighters slipped away undetected. This wasn't about Stitch or Williams or any of the other officers who had treated her like a second-class citizen. This was about proving that she belonged in the cockpit of an FA-18, regardless of what anyone else thought. Rebecca made a decision that would change everything. Instead of relaying the intercept coordinates to the squadron, she saved them to her personal files. She documented the exact tracking method she had used, the signal processing techniques that had made it possible, and the precise timing of the French attack. Then she began planning something that would either resurrect her career or destroy it completely. That evening, she requested a meeting with Tony Rodriguez in the ship's quiet corner of the mess hall. The conversation that followed would set in motion events that none of them could have anticipated. "I need to ask you something," Rebecca said, her voice low and intense, "and I need you to think carefully before you answer." Tony leaned forward, recognizing the gravity in her tone. "What is it?" "If I could prove that I'm not just qualified to fly intercept missions, but that I'm better at it than anyone else in the squadron, would you be willing to help me?" "What kind of proof are you talking about?" Rebecca glanced around to make sure they weren't being overheard, then pulled out a tablet containing her analysis of the day's failed exercise. "I tracked the French fighters through the interference that blinded everyone else. I know exactly where they were when they were there, and how they got past our defenses." Tony's eyes widened as he studied the data. "This is incredible. How did you—" "That's not the important question. The important question is, what am I going to do with this information?" "You're going to report it to command, right? Show them what you discovered?" Rebecca shook her head. "I'm going to do something better. I'm going to prove that I can do what they say I can't do. I'm going to show them that all their assumptions about my capabilities are wrong." "How?" Rebecca's smile was sharp and determined. "By doing exactly what they've been telling me I'm not qualified to do. I'm going to fly an intercept mission, and I'm going to do it better than any of them ever could." Tony stared at her in shock. "Glint, you can't be serious. That's like throwing your career away." "No," Rebecca said firmly. "That's the only way I'm going to have a career worth having." The storm was coming, and Rebecca Morrison was going to be ready for it. The weeks that followed Rebecca's decision were filled with a quiet, methodical preparation that would have impressed a chess grandmaster. Every spare moment was spent in the simulation bay, but now her work had a different purpose. She wasn't just monitoring exercises, she was preparing for the most important flight of her life. Tony Rodriguez became her unlikely co-conspirator, though he spent most of their planning sessions trying to talk her out of what he called the most insane plan in military aviation history. "Let me get this straight," he said during one of their late-night meetings in the empty mess hall. "You're planning to steal an FA-18, launch it without authorization, and somehow prove your competence by successfully completing an intercept mission that the entire squadron failed to handle?" "I'm not stealing anything," Rebecca corrected. "I'm borrowing it, and I'm not launching without authorization. I'm launching with authorization they don't know they've given me." She pulled out a folder containing copies of Navy regulations, training requirements, and flight authorization protocols. According to Section 12-4 of the Naval Aviation Training Manual, any pilot with current certification and valid flight status can assume temporary command of an aircraft during emergency conditions or training exercises when regular command structure is unavailable or compromised. That's for emergency situations, Glint. This isn't an emergency. "Isn't it?" Rebecca's voice carried an edge of steel. "The squadron has failed 3 consecutive intercept exercises. They've consistently missed radar signatures that any competent pilot should have detected. And they've systematically excluded the one person who has successfully tracked enemy aircraft through conditions that blinded their sensors." Tony studied the regulations Rebecca had copied. "Even if you could make a legal argument, you'd still need access to an aircraft, clearance for takeoff, and detailed knowledge of the training exercise schedule, atmospheric conditions, and tactical positioning of all participating aircraft." Rebecca smiled. "Guess who's been monitoring all of that information for the past month?" "You're serious about this." "I've never been more serious about anything in my life." Rebecca's preparation went beyond just studying regulations and flight plans. She had been using her access to the simulation systems to run countless practice scenarios, refining her unconventional radar tracking techniques and developing new approaches to low-altitude intercept missions. Her method was based on a principle that most pilots ignored. The ocean's surface could be used as a reflective backdrop to enhance radar signals rather than scatter them. By adjusting the angle and frequency of her radar sweeps, she could create a clearer picture of aircraft positions than standard detection methods allowed. It was a technique that required split-second timing, precise mathematical calculations, and the kind of intuitive understanding of electromagnetic physics that most pilots never developed. But Rebecca had been perfecting it for years, and she knew it worked. The opportunity she was waiting for came during the 4th week of the joint training exercise. Intelligence reports indicated that the French naval aviation team was planning a surprise attack designed to test the carrier's defense capabilities. The scenario would involve multiple aircraft approaching from different vectors, using advanced stealth techniques to avoid detection. It was exactly the kind of challenge that had consistently defeated the squadron's conventional approach. Rebecca spent the night before the exercise double-checking her calculations and reviewing her flight plan. She had identified a window of opportunity during the initial phase of the attack when confusion among the command structure would provide her with the cover she needed to launch. The plan was simple in concept but required flawless execution. During the early moments of the exercise, when the squadron was scrambling to respond to the surprise attack, Rebecca would access one of the standby aircraft and launch before anyone realized what was happening. She would then demonstrate her tracking techniques by successfully intercepting the French aircraft that had eluded the squadron's best efforts. The proof would be undeniable: her radar signature data, her flight telemetry, and most importantly, her results. "There's still time to change your mind," Tony said as they reviewed the plan one final time. "This could end your career." "My career's already over," Rebecca replied. "They've made sure of that. This is my chance to prove that their assumptions about my capabilities are wrong. And if you're wrong, if something goes wrong with the aircraft or the weather then I'll face the consequences. But I'd rather risk everything on my own terms than spend the rest of my career watching other people do poorly at something I know I could do better." Tony was quiet for a long moment, studying Rebecca's face in the dim light of the mess hall. Finally, he nodded. "Okay, but if you're going to do this, you're going to do it right. I've been thinking about your launch window, and I have some ideas about how to minimize the risk of detection." "What kind of ideas?" "The kind that might keep you from spending the rest of your life in military prison." As they refined the details of Rebecca's plan, neither of them could have anticipated the chain of events that would follow her unauthorized flight. They were focused on the immediate challenge of proving her capabilities, but they were about to set in motion something much larger. The Navy was about to learn that Rebecca Morrison was not the person they thought she was. She was better. The question was whether they would be wise enough to recognize it. Dawn came early on the morning of the exercise, painting the carrier deck in shades of gold and crimson that made the assembled aircraft look like sleeping giants. Rebecca had been awake for hours, running through her mental checklist and monitoring the weather conditions that would determine the success or failure of her plan. The atmospheric interference pattern she had been tracking was building exactly as her calculations had predicted. Within 2 hours, it would create the perfect radar shadow for the French attack, the same kind of blind spot that had allowed them to slip past the squadron's defenses in previous exercises. But this time, Rebecca would be ready for them. She made her way to the flight deck with the casual confidence of someone who belonged there, her helmet bag slung over her shoulder, and her flight suit crisp with morning starch. The deck crew was focused on preparing the primary aircraft for the day's mission, leaving the standby jets largely unattended. One of those standby aircraft was an FA-18F Super Hornet that had been configured for training exercises, but loaded with enough fuel for extended flight operations. It was positioned near the edge of the flight deck, close enough to the catapult system to allow for rapid launch, but far enough from the main activity to avoid immediate attention. Rebecca approached the aircraft with the same methodical precision she brought to everything else. She completed her pre-flight inspection, checking fuel levels, hydraulic systems, and avionics with the thoroughness of someone who knew that a single mistake could be fatal. The aircraft was perfect. As she climbed into the cockpit, Rebecca felt a sense of rightness that she hadn't experienced in months. This was where she belonged, not in the simulation bay watching other people fly, but in the pilot's seat of one of the most advanced fighter aircraft ever built. She ran through the startup sequence with muscle memory developed through years of training, each switch and button responding to her touch with mechanical precision. The engines spooled up with a growing whine that vibrated through the airframe, and suddenly the aircraft was alive beneath her hands. The radio crackled with chatter from the control tower, but Rebecca didn't respond. She wasn't ready to announce her presence, not yet. She taxied the Super Hornet toward the catapult with the smooth confidence of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. The deck crew, assuming she was part of the scheduled launch sequence, guided her into position without question. It wasn't until she was locked onto the catapult that someone in the control tower noticed the discrepancy. "Unscheduled launch. On Cat 2, came the confused voice over the radio. "Identity and authorization, please." Rebecca keyed her microphone for the first time since entering the aircraft. "Tower, this is Morrison, launching for training exercise intercept mission." "Morrison, you're not on the flight schedule. Return to parking and shut down immediately." "Negative, Tower. I'm responding to emergency intercept conditions. Launching now." Before anyone could respond, Rebecca gave the signal to the catapult crew. The massive steam-powered system hurled her aircraft forward with crushing force, accelerating from 0 to 150 miles per hour in less than 3 seconds. Suddenly, she was airborne. The sensation of flight hit her like a drug, flooding her system with adrenaline and pure joy. Below her, the carrier shrank to a small gray shape on the endless blue of the ocean. Above her, the sky opened into infinite possibility, but Rebecca didn't have time to enjoy the moment. She had work to do. She immediately dropped to low altitude, skimming just above the ocean's surface where the radar interference was strongest. Her modified tracking system came online, cutting through the electromagnetic noise that was blinding the squadron's conventional sensors. And there they were, 2 French Rafales approaching from the southwest at high speed, using the radar shadow to mask their approach. They were flying in perfect formation, confident that their stealth approach would allow them to slip past the carrier's defenses undetected. They were about to learn otherwise. Rebecca locked onto both aircraft with her enhanced tracking system, her radar painting them with crystal clarity despite the interference that was confusing every other sensor in the fleet. She could see their exact positions, their speed, their heading, and most importantly, their complete tactical plan. But instead of immediately reporting their positions to the fleet, Rebecca made a decision that would change everything. She decided to intercept them herself. Banking hard to the left, she adjusted her course to put herself on an intercept vector with the lead Rafale. Her modified radar system gave her advantages that the French pilots couldn't have anticipated. She could see them clearly while remaining invisible to their sensors. The interception happened with textbook precision. Rebecca approached from the Rafale's blind spot, using the same electromagnetic interference that was hiding the French aircraft to mask her own approach. By the time the French pilot realized he was being tracked, Rebecca was already in position for a theoretical missile lock. "Rafale lead, this is Glint," she announced over the international training frequency. "You are painted and locked. Mission kill confirmed." The response came back in accented English, tinged with surprise and grudging respect. "Glint, this is Rafale lead. How did you penetrate our stealth approach?" "Trade secret," Rebecca replied, already maneuvering toward the second French aircraft. "Rafale 2, you're next." The second interception was even more impressive than the first. The French pilot, warned by his teammates' fate, attempted evasive maneuvers designed to break radar lock. But Rebecca's system was too advanced, her tracking too precise. Within minutes, she had achieved a second theoretical kill. "Rafale 2, you are painted and locked. Mission kill confirmed." The radio fell silent as the implications of what had just happened sank in. A single American pilot, flying solo in conditions that had previously defeated entire squadrons, had successfully intercepted and neutralized a coordinated stealth attack by 2 of the most advanced fighter aircraft in the world. But the real shock was yet to come. "All stations, this is carrier control," came the voice of Captain Williams over the command frequency. "Identify the pilot of the unauthorized Super Hornet." Rebecca keyed her microphone one final time. "Carrier control. This is Lieutenant Rebecca Morrison, call sign Glint, returning to base with 2 confirmed intercepts. Request permission to land." The silence that followed was deafening. The flight deck of the USS Theodore Roosevelt had never been quieter. Word of Rebecca's unauthorized intercept had spread through the ship like wildfire, and it seemed like every off-duty sailor had found a reason to be topside when she returned. Rebecca's Super Hornet touched down with textbook precision, the arresting cable catching her aircraft with a solid thunk that reverberated across the deck. As she taxied to a parking position, she could see the crowd of officers and enlisted personnel gathered near the island superstructure. At the center of the group stood Captain Williams, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. Beside him, Lieutenant Commander Harrison looked like he'd just swallowed something poisonous. Rebecca shut down her engines and went through the post-flight checklist with the same methodical precision she brought to everything else. She had known this moment would come, and she was prepared for it. As she climbed down from the cockpit, the crowd parted to allow Captain Williams to approach. His voice, when he spoke, was loud enough to carry across the entire flight deck. "Lieutenant Morrison, you are under arrest for unauthorized use of military aircraft, violation of direct orders, and conduct prejudicial to good order and discipline. You will be confined to quarters pending formal charges." Rebecca came to attention and responded with military bearing. "Sir, I request permission to submit my flight data and intercept documentation for review." "You'll have plenty of time to explain yourself at your court-martial," Williams snapped. "Master-at-Arms, escort the lieutenant to the brig." But before the military police could step forward, Another voice cut through the tension. "Captain Williams, I'd like to review that flight data before any formal charges are filed." Everyone turned to see Commander Patricia Hayes, the carrier Air Group commander, approaching with a tablet in her hand. Her expression was unreadable, but her tone carried the authority of someone who outranked everyone present. "Ma'am, Lieutenant, Morrison violated direct orders and stole military property," Williams protested. "The charges are clear-cut." "What's clear-cut is that she achieved something our entire squadron has failed to accomplish in 4 weeks of training," Commander Hayes replied. "I've been monitoring the exercise from the Combat Information Center. Her intercept data is flawless." She held up the tablet, displaying Rebecca's radar tracking logs. "Lieutenant Morrison successfully detected and intercepted 2 stealth aircraft, using techniques that our best pilots couldn't master. That's not the performance of someone who should be confined to simulation support." "That doesn't excuse her violation of orders," Williams said, but some of the heat had gone out of his voice. "No, it doesn't. But it does raise questions about why someone with this level of capability was excluded from flight operations in the first place." The crowd had grown larger, and Rebecca could see several of her fellow pilots pushing forward to get a better view. Tony Rodriguez was there, along with several others who had witnessed her months of frustration with the assignment system. "Commander." Hayes turned to Rebecca. "Lieutenant, I want you to explain exactly how you achieved these intercepts. Your methods are unconventional." Rebecca straightened her shoulders and spoke with quiet confidence. "Ma'am, I developed a modified radar tracking protocol that uses the ocean's surface as a reflective backdrop to enhance signal clarity. By adjusting the sweep angle and frequency modulation, I can detect aircraft that are invisible to standard sensors." "Show me." Rebecca walked to her aircraft and retrieved her flight computer, connecting it to a portable display unit that one of the technicians had brought forward. The crowd pressed closer as she called up her radar data from the intercept. "Here's the standard radar view during the exercise," she said, pointing to a display that showed nothing but electromagnetic noise. "And here's the same data processed through my modified protocol." The screen flickered, then resolved into a crystal-clear image showing the positions of both French aircraft. The clarity was startling. Every detail of their approach was visible, from their formation spacing to their exact altitude. "This is impossible," Stitch said, his voice carrying a note of disbelief. "Our equipment can't penetrate that kind of interference." "Your equipment can't," Rebecca corrected. "But the equipment can, if you know how to use it properly." She pulled up another display showing the mathematical algorithms she had developed to process the radar data. "I've been working on this technique for 3 years, refining it through simulation testing and theoretical analysis. Today was the first opportunity I had to prove it works in actual combat conditions." Commander Hayes studied the data with the sharp attention of someone who understood its implications. "Lieutenant, this represents a significant advancement in radar technology. Why wasn't this information shared with the squadron?" "Ma'am, I tried to share it. I submitted detailed reports on my research, requested opportunities to demonstrate the technique, and warned about the atmospheric conditions that would create today's radar interference. My recommendations were dismissed as simulation only. Theory, and I was told to focus on my assigned duties." Rebecca glanced at Stitch, whose face had gone pale. "Lieutenant Commander Harrison specifically stated that my technical analysis was disruptive to unit morale, and that I should leave the real flying to the real pilots." The crowd murmured at this revelation. Several pilots exchanged glances, remembering conversations they had overheard or participated in. Commander Hayes turned to Williams. "Captain, is this accurate?" Williams looked like he was calculating the political implications of his answer. The lieutenant's assignment to simulation support was based on her performance evaluations and the needs of the squadron. "What performance evaluations?" Rebecca asked, her voice sharp with controlled anger. "Ma'am, I request permission to review my official file." "Granted," Commander Hayes said immediately. Tony Rodriguez stepped forward. "Commander, I have copies of Morrison's actual performance scores. She's consistently rated in the top 10% of the squadron for technical proficiency and flight readiness." He pulled out a folder he had been carrying. She's also logged more simulation hours than any other pilot in the group, and her accuracy scores on intercept scenarios are the highest on record. Commander Hayes took the folder and quickly scanned its contents. Her expression grew progressively darker as she read. "Captain Williams," she said, her voice deadly quiet. "According to these records, Lieutenant Morrison should have been selected for the primary intercept rotation, not relegated to support duties. Can you explain this discrepancy?" Williams was clearly struggling. "The selection process involves multiple factors beyond just technical scores: unit cohesion, leadership potential, experience with international exercises." "Bull," came a voice from the crowd. Everyone turned to see Senior Chief Petty Officer Marcus Johnson, the head of the aviation maintenance crew, pushing forward. He was a 20-year Navy veteran whose opinion carried significant weight with both officers and enlisted personnel. "Permission to speak freely, Commander?" "Granted, Senior Chief. I've been working on this flight deck for 15 years, and I've never seen a pilot who understands these aircraft better than Morrison. She's caught maintenance issues that our diagnostic computers missed, she's identified performance problems that saved us from potential accidents, and she's done it all while being treated like she doesn't belong here." Johnson turned to face Williams directly. "Sir, with respect, the only reason Morrison wasn't flying intercept missions is because certain officers didn't want her to succeed." The silence that followed was electric. Rebecca could feel the weight of dozens of eyes on her, but for the first time in months, they weren't looks of dismissal or condescension. They were looks of recognition. Commander Hayes closed the folder and looked around the assembled crowd. "Here's what's going to happen. Lieutenant Morrison will face disciplinary action for her unauthorized flight, but those charges will be balanced against her exceptional performance and the circumstances that led to her actions." She turned to Williams. "Captain, you and I will be having a detailed discussion about personnel management and the proper utilization of pilot resources. I want a full review of the squadron's assignment procedures on my desk by tomorrow morning." Then she looked at Rebecca. "Lieutenant, you will work with our technical staff to document your radar enhancement techniques and develop training protocols for the rest of the squadron. Your methods could revolutionize how we conduct intercept operations." Rebecca felt a surge of vindication, but Commander Hayes wasn't finished. "However," the commander continued, "your unauthorized use of military aircraft was inexcusable. Regardless of the results, you will face a formal reprimand and loss of flight privileges for 2 weeks while we investigate this matter fully." "Understood, ma'am," Rebecca replied. The punishment was fair, and more importantly, it was temporary. As the crowd began to disperse, Stitch approached Rebecca with an expression she had never seen on his face before, respect mixed with something that might have been shame. "Morrison," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology." "Yes, you do," Rebecca replied without hesitation. "Your technique, it's brilliant. I should have listened when you tried to explain it." "You should have listened to a lot of things I tried to explain," Stitch nodded, accepting the rebuke. "For what it's worth, I'll be first in line to learn your methods." Rebecca studied his face, looking for signs of insincerity. Finding none, she extended her hand. "Apology accepted, sir. But if we're going to work together, it's going to be as equals." "Agreed." As Rebecca walked across the flight deck toward the debriefing room, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months: the satisfaction of being recognized for her true capabilities. The unauthorized flight had been a risk that could have ended her career. Instead, it had become the foundation for a new beginning. 2 weeks later, Rebecca stood before a formal review board in the carrier's main briefing room. The panel consisted of Commander Hayes, Captain Williams, and 2 senior officers from Fleet Headquarters who had flown in specifically to investigate what the Navy was already calling the Morrison Incident. The room was packed beyond capacity. Every pilot in the squadron was present, along with representatives from the technical staff, senior enlisted personnel, and several officers from other ships in the battle group. Word of Rebecca's unauthorized intercept had spread throughout the fleet, and everyone wanted to see how the story would end. Rebecca had spent her 2-week suspension working closely with the carrier's technical team to document her radar enhancement techniques. The process had been both exhausting and exhilarating. Finally, she was able to share the knowledge she had been developing for years with people who understood its significance. The results were revolutionary. Initial testing showed that her methods could improve intercept accuracy by up to 300% in adverse conditions. The implications for naval aviation were staggering. Commander Hayes called the hearing to order and addressed the panel. "Gentlemen, we're here to review the actions of Lieutenant Rebecca Morrison on the morning of October 15th when she took unauthorized control of a Navy FA-18F Super Hornet and conducted intercept operations during a joint training exercise." She paused and looked directly at Rebecca. "Lieutenant Morrison, you stand accused of violation of direct orders, unauthorized use of military property, and conduct prejudicial to good order and discipline. How do you plead?" Rebecca stood and faced the panel. "Ma'am, I plead guilty to the charges as stated, but I request permission to provide context for my actions." "Granted." Rebecca had prepared for this moment carefully. She knew that her career hung in the balance, but she also knew that she had a story to tell that needed to be heard. "Ma'am, for 18 months I have been systematically excluded from flight operations despite maintaining the highest technical proficiency scores in my squadron. I have been relegated to simulation support duties, not because of any deficiency in my capabilities, but because certain members of the squadron leadership believed that I was not suitable for combat operations." She gestured toward the display screen at the front of the room. "During my time in simulation support, I developed advanced radar tracking techniques that have now been proven to provide significant advantages in combat scenarios. I repeatedly attempted to share this information with squadron leadership, and my efforts were consistently dismissed." Rebecca clicked a remote control and the screen lit up with her radar data from the unauthorized flight. "On the morning of October 15th, I warned the squadron about atmospheric conditions that would create radar interference. My warnings were ignored. When the French attack commenced, our aircraft were flying blind through exactly the conditions I had predicted." The display showed the radar tracks from the squadron's failed intercept attempts, contrasted with the crystal-clear data from Rebecca's modified systems. "I had two choices: watch our squadron fail another exercise while possessing the knowledge to prevent that failure, or take action to demonstrate that my techniques work in real-world conditions." Rebecca paused and looked each panel member in the eye. "I chose to act. My unauthorized flight resulted in the successful intercept of 2 stealth aircraft that had defeated our entire squadron using conventional methods. I submit that while my actions violated protocol, they also proved the validity of techniques that could save lives in actual combat situations." One of the officers from Fleet Headquarters leaned forward. "Lieutenant, your results are impressive, but surely you understand that unauthorized use of military aircraft cannot be excused, regardless of the outcome." "Yes, sir, I understand that completely. I accept full responsibility for my actions and any consequences that result from them." Commander Hayes spoke next. "Lieutenant Morrison, in the 2 weeks since your flight, we have conducted extensive testing of your radar enhancement techniques. The results have been forwarded to the Pentagon for evaluation as a potential fleet-wide upgrade to our intercept capabilities." She held up a thick folder. "This represents the preliminary assessment from the Naval Air Systems Command. Their conclusion is that your methods represent the most significant advancement in fighter radar technology in over a decade." Rebecca felt her heart skip a beat, but she maintained her composure. "Furthermore," Commander Hayes continued, "we have conducted a thorough review of your treatment by squadron leadership. What we found was a pattern of discrimination and professional sabotage that reflects poorly on this command." She turned to Captain Williams, whose face had gone ashen. "Captain Williams, your decision to exclude Lieutenant Morrison from flight operations was not based on her qualifications or performance. It was based on personal bias and poor judgment that has deprived the Navy of valuable expertise." Williams started to speak, but Commander Hayes held up a hand to silence him. "The review board's findings are as follows. Lieutenant Morrison's unauthorized flight was a serious violation of military protocol that cannot be overlooked. However, the circumstances that led to her actions, combined with the exceptional results she achieved, warrant special consideration." Commander Hayes stood and addressed Rebecca directly. Lieutenant Morrison, you are hereby sentenced to a formal reprimand that will be placed in your permanent record. You will also forfeit 1 month's pay as punishment for your unauthorized use of military property. Rebecca nodded, accepting the punishment. However, Commander Hayes continued, you are also hereby promoted to Lieutenant Commander, effective immediately, and assigned as the squadron's new Director of Advanced Tactical Systems. Your first responsibility will be to train every pilot in this battle group on your radar enhancement techniques. The room erupted in spontaneous applause. Rebecca felt tears spring to her eyes as the weight of months of frustration and vindication washed over her. But Commander Hayes wasn't finished. Captain Williams, you are hereby relieved of squadron command and reassigned to administrative duties pending further review of your leadership decisions. Williams stood stiffly and saluted. Yes, ma'am. Lieutenant Commander Harrison will assume temporary command of the squadron until a permanent replacement can be appointed. Stitch rose and saluted as well. Ma'am, if I may, I request that Lieutenant Commander Morrison be considered for permanent squadron command. Her technical expertise and leadership under pressure make her the ideal candidate. Rebecca looked at him in surprise. 6 weeks ago, he had been her biggest obstacle. Now he was advocating for her promotion. Commander Hayes smiled slightly. That recommendation will be taken under advisement. As the hearing concluded and the crowd began to disperse, Rebecca found herself surrounded by fellow pilots offering congratulations and requests to learn her techniques. For the first time since arriving on the carrier, she felt like she truly belonged. Tony Rodriguez was the first to reach her. Congratulations, Commander Morrison, he said with a grin that stretched from ear to ear. I couldn't have done this without your support, Hawk, Rebecca replied. Thank you for believing in me when no one else would. I didn't believe in you, Tony said. I knew you were right. There's a difference. As Rebecca looked around the room at the faces of her colleagues, some respectful, some curious, all genuinely interested in what she had to teach them, she realized that her unauthorized flight had accomplished something more important than just proving her technical capabilities. It had forced the Navy to confront its own biases and recognize talent regardless of where it came from or how it challenged conventional thinking. The girl who had been told she would never fly off a carrier had not only flown, she had revolutionized how flying was done. 6 months later, Lieutenant Commander Rebecca Morrison stood on the bridge of the USS Theodore Roosevelt, watching the sunset paint the Pacific Ocean in shades of gold and crimson. The carrier was returning to port after what the Navy was already calling the most successful training deployment in recent memory. Rebecca's radar enhancement techniques had been adopted fleet-wide, and pilots from around the world were coming to study her methods. The unauthorized flight that had nearly ended her career had instead launched a revolution in naval aviation tactics. But the changes went deeper than just technology. The Morrison Incident, as it was now officially known, in Navy records had triggered a comprehensive review of personnel management practices throughout the fleet. New protocols had been implemented to ensure that technical expertise was properly recognized and utilized regardless of the source. More importantly, a new culture was emerging, one that valued innovation and questioned authority when that authority was based on bias rather than competence. Commander Morrison, came a voice from behind her. Rebecca turned to see Ensign Lisa Parker, one of the newest pilots assigned to the squadron. She was young, eager, and reminded Rebecca of herself 6 months earlier, brilliant but struggling to be heard in a system that didn't always recognize talent in unexpected places. What is it, Parker? Ma'am, I've been working on some modifications to the targeting algorithms in the new radar system. I think I might have found a way to improve accuracy in low visibility conditions. Rebecca smiled. A few months ago, a junior officer approaching a superior with unsolicited technical suggestions would have been considered presumptuous. Now it was encouraged. Show me what you've got. They walked to the nearby tactical display where Parker pulled up her analysis. Rebecca studied the data with the same methodical attention she brought to everything else, asking questions and offering suggestions. This is good work, Rebecca said finally. Have you run simulation tests? Yes, ma'am. The preliminary results show a 12% improvement in target acquisition speed. Excellent. I want you to present this to the technical review board next week. And Parker? Yes, ma'am? Don't let anyone tell you that your ideas aren't worth hearing. If the data supports your conclusions, then you have a responsibility to share them. Parker beamed with pride. Thank you, ma'am. I won't let you down. As the young ensign hurried away to prepare her presentation, Rebecca reflected on how much had changed. The squadron that had once dismissed her expertise was now actively seeking out innovative thinking from every member. Stitch approached, from the direction of the Flight Operations Center, carrying a folder of mission reports. In the months since his promotion to squadron commander, he had proven to be an effective leader who valued competence over politics. Rebecca, he said, using the informal address that had become common among the senior staff, I just got word from Fleet Headquarters. They want you in Washington next month to brief the Joint Chiefs on your radar techniques. The Joint Chiefs? Rebecca raised an eyebrow. That's a pretty high-level audience for a technical briefing. It's more than just technical, Stitch replied. Word is that your methods are being considered for implementation across all service branches. The Air Force and Marines are both interested in adapting your techniques for their aircraft. Rebecca felt a familiar surge of excitement at the prospect of new challenges. What about the squadron? I can't leave in the middle of our training cycle. Actually, you can. Parker and Rodriguez have both qualified as instructors for your techniques. The knowledge base you've built is solid enough to be self-sustaining. You're trying to get rid of me, Rebecca said with mock suspicion. Stitch laughed. Hardly. I'm trying to make sure your talents are used where they can have the biggest impact. The Navy needs people like you in positions where they can influence policy, not just tactics. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the activity on the flight deck below. The evening launch cycle was beginning, with FA-18s preparing for night training missions. Every aircraft was equipped with Rebecca's enhanced radar systems, and every pilot had been trained in her techniques. You know, Stitch said thoughtfully, 6 months ago, I would have said that unauthorized flight of yours was the worst thing that could have happened to squadron discipline. And now? Now I think it was exactly what we needed. Sometimes the system needs to be shaken up by someone who refuses to accept that the way we've always done it is the best way. Rebecca nodded, remembering the fear and determination she had felt climbing into that Super Hornet without authorization. It had been the biggest risk of her life, but it had also been the moment when she stopped accepting other people's limitations on her potential. There's something else, Stitch said, his tone becoming more serious. Command wants to offer you a choice. You can stay with the squadron and continue developing tactical innovations, or you can transfer to the Pentagon and work on policy implementation. What do you think I should do? I think you should do whatever challenges you the most. You're at your best when you're pushing boundaries. Rebecca considered the options. Staying with the squadron would mean continuing the hands-on work she loved, flying, testing, and refining techniques with immediate practical applications. Moving to Washington would mean influencing policy on a larger scale, but with less direct involvement in operational activities. How long do I have to decide? 2 weeks. I'll think about it. As night fell over the carrier, Rebecca made her way to the quiet corner of the ship where she had spent so many hours during her exile to simulation support. The room looked different now. It had been expanded and upgraded to serve as the Advanced Tactical Systems Laboratory where pilots from across the fleet came to learn and develop new techniques. Her old workstation was still there, now equipped with the latest technology but still bearing the worn spots where her hands had rested during those long months of preparation. She sat down and pulled out the logbook that had started it all. The collection of hand-drawn radar plots and theoretical calculations that had eventually revolutionized naval aviation. On the final page, she wrote a new entry, Mission accomplished, ready for next challenge. Rebecca closed the logbook and placed it in the archive drawer, where it would be preserved as part of the squadron's historical record. Future pilots would study her techniques, but more importantly, they would learn that innovation could come from anywhere, even from someone the system had written off as unfit for flight operations. As she prepared to leave the laboratory, Rebecca caught sight of her reflection in the darkened window. She saw a confident officer whose expertise was respected, whose opinions were sought, and whose future was limited only by her own ambitions. It was a far cry from the frustrated lieutenant who had been told she would never fly off a carrier. The girl who had once sat in this same room, dismissed and overlooked, had not only proven her worth, she had redefined what worth meant. She had shown that the best ideas don't always come from the loudest voices or the highest ranks, but from the people who refuse to accept that good enough is actually good enough. Rebecca Morrison had found her place in the Navy, but more importantly, she had created a place where others like her would be heard. The story of the unauthorized flight would be told for years to come, but it wouldn't be remembered as the tale of a rogue pilot who broke the rules. It would be remembered as the moment when the Navy learned that its greatest strength lay not in maintaining tradition, but in recognizing excellence wherever it emerged. And in the end, that lesson was worth more than any single intercept mission. It was a foundation for the future. Rebecca Morrison's story reminds us that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is accept other people's limitations on your potential. When expertise is dismissed and talent is overlooked, the system doesn't just fail the individual, it fails itself. If you've ever been told you're not ready, not qualified, or not the right fit, remember that the people making those judgments aren't always right. Sometimes the only way to prove your worth is to stop asking for permission and start demonstrating your capabilities. What boundaries are you ready to push? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.